what I'm going to show you here is we're going to look at the formula for Pythagoras' theorem. So you guys should have all seen this. It's usually represented as a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Formulas always have a meaning. You want to understand the meaning behind the formula before you use it. It's important. Basically what this means is A, if you remember, was one of the legs. It didn't matter which one. And B was the other leg. It didn't matter which one. So these are the legs, and this is my hypotenuse. I have to label the hypotenuse C. That's really important. A and B don't matter as much, but you need to make the hypotenuse C. These are just labels. I'm going to make this side A. Okay, so this side here is A, and this side here is B. Now the meaning between this equation and this picture, remember that the area of a square is the side length squared. So A squared means this square here. B squared is also a square. That means this square here. And C squared would be this square here. So all this is saying is that this square plus this square equals this big square. That's exactly what we said on the last page. We just did it visually. In this case, it's not a picture, it's symbols. It's an A, a B, and a C, but it means the same thing. So people sometimes ask, do I need to know how to do it this way? It's one of the key skills that you're going to learn in math. You need to know how to solve equations algebraically. It's going to become more and more important as you guys go through school. So let's go through and do that. A squared, we said 4 was A, so this will be 4 squared. B was 8, okay? So this will be 8 squared. And C we don't know. Remember that the whole purpose of Pythagoras' theorem is to determine one of the sides that you're missing, given that you have the other two. So we could have found any of the 3 sides, we just have to have the other 2. All right, so it's C squared, okay? Here you want to simplify. Remember from your order of operations from earlier courses, we'll do it again this year. Get rid of these exponents here. Don't work with it like this. So 4 squared is 16. 8 squared is 64. Okay? From here, you want to simplify. You want to add these terms up before you deal with this thing on the other side. We'll leave that to last. So 16 and 64 gives us 80. Okay? Now that we've simplified both sides, the last step is we need to get C on its own. We're not solving for C squared. C squared is a box. We actually want the side length here. We want the hypotenuse. So we need to actually take the square root of both sides. So take the square root of 80 on the left, and on the right-hand side, the square root of C squared, which is actually written like this, is just C. Remember that a square root is the opposite operation to squaring. They cancel each other out. So on this side, you're just going to get C. So the answer to our question is that the length of this third side here, the hypotenuse, is actually the square root of 80. Okay? And if you take the square root of 80 on your calculator, it should be somewhere between 81 and 100. Okay? I'd like it if you can leave your answer as a radical like that, like a square root basically. If you put it in a decimal, that's fine as well. The question here is a word problem. Word problems obviously are a bit harder because you actually have to interpret something that you're reading and then put it into some sort of workable math format. I always recommend a diagram. Diagrams are the best way to start these. Here we got 2 boats. One of them has gone 20 kilometers due east after 2 hours, and the other one has traveled 24 kilometers due north. The question's asking how far apart are the boats, so it's asking for distance. Now, this may not be apparent to you when you read it, so maybe just draw it out, and maybe you'll see it after that. So I'm going to draw a boat that's gone 20 kilometers due east. So let's just pick a starting point. I'm just going to call this dot here, start. One of the boats is going to go 20 kilometers due east. Okay, and the other one is going to go 24 kilometers due north. So let's draw that in. Okay, so this one should be a little bit longer than that. Again, I'm no artist, so these are only going to be so correct. All right, so looking at this, I'm going to draw in maybe a little boat. Sure. And then here, we'll have another boat. Okay, maybe I'll call this boat A and this boat B. So with this diagram, it now becomes more apparent what the question is getting at. Here you can see that we're forming a right triangle because these boats are moving at 90 degrees to each other, right? East and north are perpendicular, so they're 90 degrees. So we know that right here we got a 90-degree angle. And what that allows us to do is draw in a line here that represents the direct distance between A and B. You'll probably see now that we got a right triangle. If we have a right triangle, we can use Pythagoras' theorem. Okay, so I have to label this side C, remember? That was always a requirement. The legs, the other two sides, don't matter as much. So let's call this one B, and let's call this one A. Okay, and now I'm just going to put in my distances. So this one was 20, and then this one here was 24. Okay, now I'm going to use the equation for Pythagoras' theorem. So we'll have A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay, B was 20. We'll substitute in our numbers now. 24 was B, and we don't know C. Okay, again, simplify the left-hand side, get rid of these exponents. 20 squared is 400. Just do that on your calculator. And 24 squared is 576, I believe. Yes, 576. Okay? So we've simplified the left-hand side. Before you deal with this, just add these two numbers up. 400 and 576 just gives us 976, okay? Show all your work, do it slowly, step by step. If you skip steps, you're asking for trouble when you may know how to solve the problem, but you make a silly error, okay? So last step here, we need to get C on its own. Remember, C squared is actually a square. We want the side length here. We want the actual distance between A and B, which is actually this length here on the edge of the triangle. So what we need to do is take the square root of both sides. So we take the square root of 976 and the square root of C squared, okay? When we take the square root of both sides, we're going to get C on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, the square root of 976, which comes out to 31.24 if you put it in on your calculator. This would be fine. If you left it as square root of 976, that's fine as well. Okay? So the actual answer to our question, how far apart are these boats after 2 hours? They're 31.24 units apart, and the question happened to be in kilometers. So the answer is they're 31.24 kilometers apart after 2 hours. Okay? Difficulty level for this, I should mention, if you're in grade 8, this would be on the far end of the difficulty, so a little bit less likely for you to see a problem like this. If you're in grade 9, this is a more standard problem.